I'm just thinking though, we should get talking about the interview bit.
we should talk about other things.
Um,
That's the good thing, that whole lockdown story means that there's just actually been time to talk to people, because I was thinking about this. We know each other since we were like a baby quartet and you were a baby composer, and somehow I think we must have had time to have a proper conversation. Maybe certainly not more than my two hands, because we were so busy running all over the place all those years. It's interesting also to go back to this early piece, which was our first acquaintance to your music, and as a young composer's piece, it has sort of somehow the usual effect of having everything into the one piece. But I have to say that in the case of Blurt, it's actually a rather efficient way of doing that. So maybe you talk to me about how did that happen? Where does it come from, Blurt, and how was your experience also working with us?
well, for me, it's interesting because you're saying, you have 20-25 years of the quartet. And for me, I sort of date my career to beginning to 2000. And because in 2000, I went to Darmstadt and I won this prize at Darmstadt, and that sort of launched my name. And I had been looking forward to Darmstadt this year because several of the people that I made friends with in 2000 would be there, and there's this beautiful feeling like these are lifelong friends. It's not just about career or music, it's about, life stuff. And we were sort of saying, like, won't it be great, like, to sort of just have this moment to, like, think about our lives and, all this sort of stuff. So I missed that this year, you know what I mean? Which is probably a strange thing to say you missed at Darmstadt, but I missed that sense of marking like this anniversary. But what is very interesting to me is I started to actually go through my archive for the first time, and I'd wanted to do that this year because it was my 20th anniversary. And as I looked through the archive, I went back to Blurt, and I started looking for recordings that I had of Blurt and the score and the original score, and marking everything and being really meticulous about the parts and everything. And it was very interesting because looking at it, it's a piece that I wrote 23 years ago, and you sort of have this situation with it where it's like a piece you wrote as a student, but I can also see me changing the way that I'm writing to become closer to the way that I still write now. But also you can see this sort of weird archaeology where I submitted the piece for a competition. I'd handwritten the score, and I was shortlisted, which meant my piece would be performed, which meant they sent my score to like a parts engraver to handwrite the parts. And that doesn't exist anymore as a job. No engraver would handwrite the parts of a piece anymore. So you have this bizarre thing where I'm looking at these handwritten parts, and then somewhere over the last 23 years, I think it was the first violin part got lost. So I hand wrote, much neater, I must say, than the original engraver. I hand wrote the first violin part. And then you look at it now, and I think I tried to be as precise and as consistent about notation as I possibly could. But like, is it worth getting this put in finale, or should I just leave it as it is? And then I'm listening to these recordings, I'm listening to these different versions. And then I found this recording of you guys at Huddersfield where for some reason the camera only started halfway through Blurt. Do you know what I mean? So I've got these like half fragments of documentations where it's a camera, whereas in 1997, you never in a million years would have hoped for a video recording of something.
No,
like that didn't exist.
As you're talking about, like this handwriting or copying or whatever it is, like so much has changed. Those 20 years of career have been very intense because as we've been developing our things, we've also been running after a whole way of working that was different than what we learned as students, basically.
No, it's completely, I think it's interesting because you look at it and you think, okay, in 1997, I got a cassette. That's what I was given, a cassette of the performance. And then, they broadcast it on the radio. And so my family recorded it off the radio on as many tape machines as they could. So there's like recordings that says like Blurt, Jen's machine, Blurt, you know, tape player, kitchen tape player, because there was this feeling that like you were getting the original by recording it off the radio. So you would try to do that on as many different devices as you could. And so those sort of things are interesting to me, because you put it into perspective. You start to have memories about what was happening when you wrote the piece, you know, like, and as you get older, you're sort of interested in sort of looking at some of that history and seeing, does it need to be resolved in some way, or, you know, do you need to do some sort of shamanic work on it?
That's a nice story with the tapes, because in the context also of your later pieces of the whole Irish tradition on tapes, I mean, it's like,
oh, it's totally perfect. I'm like, okay, of course I ended up doing this. I have like a tape with my mother's handwriting that says blurt, Jen's machine. You know,
for the new composers, in the archaeology of Irish new music of the.
Well, I think also for my generation, if you were born in the 70s, those early pieces, they were often done once and never again. And there was no video of them, and you only ever had like a hissy, static laden cassette version. And so there was a lot of imaginary work that had to be done around them to listen to them. So a lot of us, by the time YouTube hit, do you know what I mean? And like, we're talking 16.
It was like, wow, you know.
Yeah, and nobody's going to go back and think, oh, I need to digitize blurt to put it online. Do you know what I mean? Because they're going, well, like, YouTube is here, so I can't compete with this. You know, so I think it is interesting how things shift. I think it's very interesting because you've played the piece more than any other group. So sort of you have a handle on it now that is actually tighter than mine is, if that makes sense, because it's so long ago that I wrote it, and when you write it, it's so close to you. And then so for me, it's really a privilege that you guys are doing it all these years later, because the piece still has things to change and has the perspectives and stuff like that, because that you don't imagine it when you're, you know, 20, 22 writing these pieces, that, you know, somebody will still perform them, you know, 23 years later. And for me, if this makes sense, it's not so much about, oh, my legacy lives on in that sort of composerly way. Like, of course it would be lovely if somebody's playing my pieces 100 years after I'm dead, but I'll be dead, so it's not like I can enjoy it or get royalties from it. But sort of when people play older pieces while you're still alive, you have the opportunity to learn about music, about yourself, about culture, about your relationships with people. And so for me, that's really fantastic.
Yeah, that's good. That's a nice thing to hear.
And, you know, like, and you've done Minard Nitsdale as well. So it's like you've played, the only quartet that I've written that you haven't played is Everything Is Important. And I thought to myself, yet again, like the string quartet is uniquely a specific, special type of ensemble. It's different than a Piero style new music chamber lineup. It's different from any new music band that calls themselves a band. It's still not the same as a string quartet. And like that feeling of being with a string quartet, either rehearsing with them or, in the case of Everything Is Important, singing with them, it is a very unique type of musical experience. And so I'm lucky to have pieces that like were written for competitions that you guys now play, you know, 23 years later, and also pieces that I wrote for you guys, because I get to sort of see what a string quartet is made of, and how you're not uniform. You're all different, and you all have your own personality.
All different bands and all the bands have in common to have this crazy, really intertwined and very intimate sort of work. That's most of the time also more you just work all the time together as quartets. If you are getting to the point of being a serious quartet, you don't play in so much different bands, and it has this intimacy, and it has this precision, which precision is always important everywhere in everything. But as we said before, it's like a question of in a quartet, if the four bows are minutely not happening, it's not the same as if you're in a Pierrot between percussion, piano, a violin, and a clarinet. There's a range. In a quartet, you don't have that range. That's a famous story.
I do think also, like with ensembles, of course, musicians are always trying to play in tune, but it's different with a string quartet, like that sense of the sound. You know, because so often with new music ensembles, it's a slightly different ensemble in every single piece. you know,
Yeah.
even if you're the
And you have,
soloist,
you
you're
have
maybe
fixed
playing.
pitches, but you get this resonance in the quartet, which is awesome, of
Exactly,
course.
exactly. No,
I'm,
and so that's really wonderful to work with and to like to experience in different ways.
yeah, well, I'm happy. We need to do everything is important is the title.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, we have to do the Montreal performance at some point.
I would love to do that when we can travel abroad once again.
And yeah, we let you know what's going on for about this one thing
Right.
right now, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Definitely.
Yes.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.